She walked in with quiet dignity, expecting nothing more than what she had paid for: a seat, a service, a right. But what she got instead was humiliation, subtle at first, wrapped in fake smiles and insincere apologies. Then bolder, sharper, meant to cut. This is the reality for many. A reality where judgment is passed before a single word is spoken. Where skin color speaks louder than money. Where people in power, flight attendants, managers, business elites, believe they get to decide who belongs. But they forgot one thing. Some of the very people they look down on, they hold more power than anyone in the room. Welcome to a series where those who abuse their authority get exactly what they deserve. Flight attendants, hotel managers, restaurant owners, people who think they can mistreat others and get away with it. But they don't know who they're messing with. And by the time they realize, it's already too late. In today's story, an elderly black woman boards a first-class flight, only to be humiliated by a flight attendant who thinks she doesn't belong. What happens next? Let's just say justice comes swiftly and publicly. Watch till the end to see the ultimate downfall of someone who thought they were untouchable. And if you love seeing arrogance meet karma, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. What would you have done in Olivia's place? Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. The airport terminal buzzed with the usual chaos of travelers rushing to their gates, flight announcements crackling over the intercom, and the scent of overpriced coffee lingering in the air. Olivia Carter, a dignified elderly black woman, walked toward the first-class boarding lane, gripping her designer handbag with a quiet poise of someone who had seen a lifetime's worth of both triumph and struggle. She was dressed impeccably, an elegant navy blue dress with a matching silk scarf draped around her neck, her gray-streaked curls neatly styled. She moved with the grace of someone accustomed to respect. But Amanda, the lead flight attendant stationed at the gate, didn't see grace. She didn't see dignity. She saw an anomaly. And anomalies in her world did not belong in first class. As Olivia approached, Amanda's lips curled into an almost imperceptible smirk. She made no effort to scan Olivia's boarding pass, her sharp blue eyes instead sweeping over the woman's appearance like a silent accusation. "Ma'am, I believe you're in the wrong lane. First-class boarding is for premium passengers only," Amanda said, her voice coated with the kind of professional politeness that barely concealed its true intent. Olivia blinked once, then held up her boarding pass, the crisp gold lettering of first class printed unmistakably at the top. "I believe I am in the right place," she said, her voice even but firm. Amanda didn't even glance at the ticket. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, eyes glinting with feigned sympathy. "Oh, dear," she sighed, loud enough for those around to hear. "I think there might have been a mix-up. Did someone gift this to you?" A couple standing behind Olivia exchanged knowing glances, the man suppressing a chuckle. Olivia, unfazed, gave a small smile. "No mix-up," she replied. "I purchased it myself." Amanda let out a soft, almost condescending laugh. "Right," she said, stretching the word just enough to make it sound like disbelief. "Well, let's get you sorted out." With exaggerated slowness, she plucked the boarding pass from Olivia's hand, making a show of scrutinizing it as though deciphering some ancient text. Behind her, another flight attendant, Lucy, younger and more hesitant, watched the exchange with clear discomfort. "Amanda," she whispered, nudging her subtly, "that's a first-class ticket. Just let her board." But Amanda waved her off with a flick of her manicured hand. "Patience, Lucy," she murmured before turning back to Olivia, pasting on an insincere smile. "I just need to verify something." Stepping aside, Amanda picked up the intercom and spoke just loud enough for those in the first-class line to overhear. "Hi, I have a potential seating issue with a passenger who may be misplaced in first class. Could you double-check?" The implication hung in the air like an unsaid insult. Several first-class passengers shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Olivia's gaze, while others, emboldened by Amanda's theatrics, exchanged smirks. One woman, clad in pearls and clutching a designer purse, muttered to her husband, "Well, this is just embarrassing." Olivia stood unmoved, her hands resting lightly on her handbag. Years of experience had taught her not to react. Amanda, meanwhile, put on a performance of mock concern. "Oh dear, it looks like we may need to reassign you to a more appropriate seat." She turned to Lucy and handed her the boarding pass. "Lucy, be a dear and escort this passenger to coach, will you?" Lucy hesitated. Amanda interrupted, voice edged with warning. "Just do it." A hush settled over the nearby passengers. Olivia inhaled slowly, the weight of their stares pressing against her. But still, she did not move. "Miss," she said, turning to Amanda, "unless there is an actual problem with my ticket, I will be taking my seat in first class." Amanda let out a small, performative sigh, as though she were the one being inconvenienced. "Fine," she said, stepping aside with an exaggerated motion, as if allowing Olivia to pass was some grand act of charity. "Just try not to disturb the other guests." As Olivia walked past her, Amanda leaned in slightly and murmured just loud enough for her to hear, "Hate to break it to you, but first class isn't a charity program." Olivia paused for half a heartbeat, but said nothing. She simply continued down the jet bridge, head high, as Amanda smirked behind her. A few feet away, Lucy clenched her jaw. She had seen Amanda pull stunts before, but this one felt particularly cruel. And yet, Amanda moved on like nothing had happened, her gaze already scanning the next group of first-class passengers, ready to shower them with warmth and deference. As the doors to the aircraft closed behind Olivia, Amanda dusted her hands off as if clearing away a nuisance. She had done her job. The natural order of things had been restored, or so she thought. As Olivia stepped onto the plane, she kept her posture upright, despite the whisper of shame curling in her chest. The feeling wasn't new. She had encountered this kind of treatment before, the sideways glances, the hushed voices, the dismissive sneers. But something about Amanda's performance at the gate had left a particularly bitter taste in her mouth. Even so, she moved forward, gripping the strap of her handbag a little tighter, as if holding onto something steady in the storm of quiet humiliation. The first-class cabin was exactly as one would expect: pristine leather seats, soft golden lighting, and the faintest scent of fresh linen. Olivia walked carefully, counting the rows in her head until she reached her assigned seat. 4A. She had barely placed her handbag down when Amanda appeared beside her once more, wearing the same faux polite smile, the kind that barely concealed the satisfaction behind her eyes. "Oh, ma'am," Amanda said, tilting her head with exaggerated concern. "I was just about to come find you. There seems to be a little mix-up." Olivia looked up slowly, her fingers resting lightly on the armrest. "Mix-up?" she repeated. "Yes," Amanda sighed dramatically, as if this entire situation was deeply inconvenient for her. "It seems like there was an issue with your seat assignment. The system must have double-booked. Happens sometimes." Olivia could feel the weight of nearby passengers' gazes shifting toward her, waiting for her reaction. She inhaled slowly. "I booked this seat in advance. First class. There shouldn't be an issue." Amanda let out a small chuckle, shaking her head in mock sympathy. "I understand, I really do. But unfortunately, the seats are already assigned, and we simply don't have any more space in first class. I'd love to help, but..." She trailed off, her meaning clear. From behind her, another flight attendant, Lucy, hovered with an uncertain expression. She had witnessed Amanda's games before, but had never seen her take it this far. "Amanda," she started hesitantly. Amanda shot her a look, quick and sharp, before smoothly pivoting back to Olivia. "I can offer you a lovely seat in the main cabin," she continued, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "It's right near the front, very comfortable." A few passengers had started murmuring now, and Olivia could hear their voices like static in the background. Is she really trying to sit here? They should have caught this before she even got on the plane. "I wouldn't make a fuss. Just take the other seat." Olivia swallowed the words rising in her throat. A younger version of herself might have fought back, might have demanded to see a manager, might have stood her ground. But she had long since learned that dignity was sometimes found not in fighting, but in enduring. She met Amanda's eyes for a long, unreadable moment before giving a small, nearly imperceptible nod. "I see," she murmured. Amanda blinked, as if surprised by the lack of resistance. Then, a slow, smug smile stretched across her lips. Perfect. I'll have someone take you there now. She turned away, but not before casting a glance toward the other passengers, as if silently reaffirming that order had been restored. Lucy took a step forward, hesitant. We do have an extra seat in the back, she said quietly. But it's near the lavatories. Amanda grinned. Oh, that sounds like a great option for her. A few chuckles rippled through the cabin. Olivia tightened her grip on her handbag, but said nothing. Amanda turned back to Olivia, her voice bright and falsely cheerful. Come on, let's get you settled. The walk through the narrow aisle felt longer than it should have. As Olivia moved past row after row of passengers, she could feel the weight of their glances, the way their conversations lowered to whispers when she passed. Some simply watched in silent amusement. Others, emboldened by Amanda's behavior, smirked openly. One man, lounging comfortably in his first-class seat, didn't bother to lower his voice as he murmured to his companion, "Guess they let just anyone buy a ticket these days." The words stung more than Olivia wanted to admit. Lucy led her toward the very back of the plane, stopping at a cramped row positioned uncomfortably close to the lavatories. The scent of artificial air freshener barely masked the underlying odor. "Here you are," Lucy said, voice softer now, almost guilty. Olivia didn't look at her. She carefully placed her handbag down, then eased herself into the seat. The fabric was rougher here, the space tighter. The air carried the faint hum of the engines, mixed with the muffled sound of a child fussing a few rows away. She folded her hands in her lap, staring straight ahead. Somewhere up front, Amanda laughed at something. Free, light, and unbothered. Olivia closed her eyes for a moment, exhaling slowly. The seat near the lavatories was cramped and stiff, but Olivia forced herself to sit with quiet dignity, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She knew better than to let discomfort show. Showing discomfort gave people like Amanda exactly what they wanted. Around her, the hum of passengers settling in filled the cabin. Laughter, zipping luggage, the clicking of seat belts. Olivia kept her gaze forward, tuning it all out. She had almost convinced herself that the worst was over. Then Amanda appeared again. "Oh, I almost forgot," Amanda chirped, her voice sugary sweet. "We need to do a quick security check on your bag." Olivia blinked, looking up slowly. "Security check?" Amanda sighed dramatically, as if explaining something terribly basic. "Yes, just a routine check. Nothing to worry about." She turned to a male flight attendant nearby, a broad-shouldered man named Greg. "Greg, would you mind?" Greg hesitated, glancing at Olivia. "Amanda, we already checked all the carry-ons at the gate." Amanda cut him off with a practiced laugh, as if Greg had just said something absurdly naive. "Come on, you know how it is. Some passengers don't always follow the rules." She placed a hand lightly on Greg's arm, lowering her voice just enough to make it sound conspiratorial. "We have to be thorough, especially when someone's not as familiar with flying in first class." She said it with a smile, but the meaning was razor sharp. Greg shifted uncomfortably but nodded, kneeling beside Olivia's seat. "Ma'am, I just need to take a quick look inside your bag." A few passengers nearby turned their heads, sensing an opportunity for mild entertainment. Olivia sat still, fingers tightening around the straps of her handbag. The last time someone had rifled through her belongings like this had been decades ago, when she was a young woman walking into a department store and a security guard had followed her, eyes filled with unspoken suspicion. She could argue. She could say this was unnecessary, humiliating, unfair. But what would that change? Without a word, she lifted her bag onto her lap and unzipped it, exposing the neatly folded contents inside. A book, a silk pouch with personal items, a wallet with polished edges. Greg hesitated. There was nothing remotely suspicious about it. He swallowed, suddenly aware of the absurdity of what he was doing. But Amanda stood behind him, arms crossed, waiting. So he went through with it. His hands moved carefully, lifting her book, opening a side pocket, brushing against her scarf. When he found nothing, he cleared his throat and stepped back. All good here, he muttered. Amanda made a show of nodding approvingly, then leaned down slightly toward Olivia. See? No harm done, she said, smiling like she had done her a favor. We just want to make sure everyone feels safe. The words sat heavy in the air. Amanda walked away without another glance, leaving Olivia to slowly zip her bag back up, the shame curling tight in her stomach. Across the aisle, a young woman with a tablet in her lap gave Olivia a quick, uneasy glance before looking away. A man nearby checked his watch, already moving on. No one said a word. It was just another moment, quickly swallowed by the rhythm of the flight. Amanda wasn't finished. As the plane taxied down the runway, Lucy approached her again, voice hushed but urgent. Amanda, don't you think that was unnecessary? Amanda gave her a blank stare. What are you talking about? The security check. You singled her out. She wasn't doing anything wrong. Amanda scoffed. Oh, please. Do you want me to ignore my instincts? You heard how entitled she sounded earlier. What if she tried to pull something later? Lucy's brows knit together. Pull what? Sitting in a seat she paid for? Amanda rolled her eyes. Look, if you want to be a saint, be my guest. But don't come crying to me when one of our actual first-class passengers complains that we're not keeping standards. Lucy opened her mouth, then shut it. She wasn't stupid. She knew Amanda had power here. Pushing too hard would mean making an enemy of someone who could make her life miserable. So she said nothing, and Amanda walked away, humming lightly to herself, completely unbothered. The flight was now in the air. Olivia stared out the small oval window, watching the clouds stretch across the sky. She had hoped the torment would end once she was seated. She was wrong. 20 minutes in, she felt a presence looming beside her again. Amanda. Ma'am, Amanda said, voice falsely polite. Since you're seated so close to the lavatories, I just want to remind you to be mindful of other passengers who may need easy access. It would be best if you didn't stretch out too much. Olivia turned slowly. Her hands were neatly folded, her legs tucked in, her posture impeccable. Amanda smiled down at her, as if she were doing Olivia a great kindness by saying this. Of course, Olivia murmured, voice steady. Wonderful. Amanda clapped her hands together. Enjoy the rest of your flight. Amanda, of course, wasn't finished. The thrill of unchallenged control made the game all the more enticing. It wasn't enough to simply make Olivia feel small. She wanted others to participate, to reinforce the idea that Olivia didn't belong. She lingered near the first-class section, striking up a conversation with a middle-aged businessman in a crisp navy suit. He had watched the earlier exchange with mild amusement, sipping his pre-flight champagne. Amanda leaned in slightly, lowering her voice just enough to sound confidential, but keeping it loud enough for those nearby to overhear. I feel terrible, she sighed dramatically, glancing toward Olivia's seat. I just hate when things like this happen. You know, when someone ends up where they shouldn't be, and we have to sort it out. It's so uncomfortable for everyone, isn't it? The businessman smirked, tapping his fingers against his armrest. Well, you handled it well, he said, voice thick with approval. Can't just let anyone waltz into first class. Amanda beamed, pleased. She straightened up just as a new passenger entered, an older white man in a tailored blazer. Her demeanor shifted instantly. Mr. Carlyle, she greeted, her voice bright and welcoming. We're so happy to have you aboard today. Carlyle nodded politely as Amanda scanned his ticket. Right this way, she said, guiding him toward his seat in first class. But just before stepping aside, she cast a pointed glance toward Olivia, letting out an exaggerated breath. There, she said lightly. Now first class feels like first class again. A woman seated nearby chuckled softly. A few heads turned toward Olivia, some with amusement, others with subtle disapproval. Olivia kept her gaze forward, her hands still folded in her lap, her breathing steady. The businessman Amanda had spoken to earlier chuckled, shaking his head as he leaned toward the passenger next to him. Back in my day, he muttered, people knew where they belonged. Amanda overheard and grinned, feigning innocence. Oh, I wouldn't say that, she cooed. I'm sure she just got a little confused. The words dripped with mockery. Olivia heard them. She heard all of it. But still, she said nothing. Amanda turned and strode past, pausing briefly near Lucy, who had been watching with visible discomfort. "See," Amanda murmured under her breath. "No one's complaining." Lucy hesitated, then said softly, "She hasn't done anything wrong." Amanda gave an exaggerated shrug. "She doesn't have to. Perception is everything, Lucy. If people feel uncomfortable, then that's the problem, isn't it?" Lucy opened her mouth as if to argue, but Amanda had already moved on, gliding effortlessly through the aisle, basking in the knowledge that her little performance had been received exactly as she had planned. For the next hour, Olivia remained motionless in her seat, listening to the murmurs around her, feeling the occasional glance burning into her skin. Every time Amanda walked by, she found a new way to reinforce the narrative, whether through a small sigh, a barely there shake of the head, or a passing comment to another flight attendant about how some people just don't understand etiquette. At one point, when a young couple in first class flagged Amanda down to request another drink, she made a deliberate show of lowering her voice, as if sharing a juicy piece of gossip. "Honestly, it's been such a mess. That woman tried to take a first class seat earlier. Can you believe it? I had to have her moved." The wife raised an eyebrow, glancing briefly toward the back of the plane. "Really?" Amanda nodded, exasperated. "Some people just don't respect how these things work." The husband scoffed. "Well, at least you got her out of the way." Amanda laughed lightly, placing their drinks down with a satisfied smile. Back in her seat, Olivia breathed in slowly through her nose, steadying herself against the growing tightness in her chest. She knew how these things worked. She had spent a lifetime walking into rooms where she wasn't wanted, sitting at tables where she had to prove herself worthy of a space she had rightfully earned. But knowing didn't make it easier. She glanced at the call button above her seat. A simple press, and she could ask for a glass of water. She could request anything the other passengers had been given without question. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to do it. She already knew how Amanda would respond. And worse, she knew how the others would look at her. So, she stayed still, her throat dry, her dignity shrinking with every passing second. Lucy, standing near the galley, bit her lip as she watched the scene unfold, frustration bubbling in her chest. She wanted to say something. She wanted to do something. But she didn't. And Amanda, victorious in her silent campaign, carried on, completely undisturbed. The murmurs from first-class passengers had faded into quiet conversations, the occasional clink of silverware against porcelain, and the soft rustle of pages turning in luxury travel magazines. Olivia, still as a statue in her cramped seat, felt like she was drifting, untethered, weightless, yet burdened by an invisible force pressing against her chest. She hadn't asked for anything, hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, but still, Amanda found her way back to her. The opportunity presented itself in the form of the drink service. Amanda, pushing the cart down the aisle with an air of casual authority, stopped right beside Olivia's row. A few first-class passengers had already been served, their crystal glasses filled with deep red and golden amber hues. When Amanda reached Olivia, she barely glanced at her, instead turning to Greg, who had been assisting with distribution. "Oh, Greg," Amanda said, her voice deliberately airy, "be careful with those glasses. You wouldn't want to spill on anyone important." Greg frowned slightly, confused by the remark, but Amanda had already leaned forward with an exaggerated motion, a glass of red wine perched precariously between her fingers. Olivia, still silent, didn't flinch when Amanda suddenly lost her grip. The wine splashed across the seat beside Olivia, seeping into the fabric, a dark crimson stain blooming against the pale upholstery. A sharp intake of breath came from a nearby passenger. Greg's eyes widened in horror. "Oh dear," Amanda sighed, placing a hand on her chest as if genuinely distressed. "I'm so sorry about that." Olivia exhaled slowly, her gaze drifting down to the spreading stain. She wasn't wearing white, at least there was that. But the humiliation clung to her more than the spilled wine ever could. Lucy, who had been observing from the galley, took a hesitant step forward. "I'll get something to clean that." Amanda cut her off with a wave of her hand. No, I've got it under control." She turned back to Olivia, her expression shifting into something that almost resembled pity. You know, we usually keep first class pristine, but I suppose accidents happen. A chuckle rippled from somewhere in the cabin. Olivia's fingers curled into the fabric of her dress. She wanted to move, to do something, but she didn't. Amanda, enjoying the reaction, or lack thereof, pressed further. I can move you if this is uncomfortable, but well, she let her eyes flick toward the already full economy cabin. It might be a bit cramped back there. There was no need to say it. She wasn't offering a solution. She was reinforcing the problem. Greg, clearly uncomfortable, knelt down to blot the spill with a handful of napkins. "Ma'am, I'm really sorry about this," he muttered under his breath. Amanda, ignoring him, turned to the passengers across the aisle and, in an almost offhand manner, said, "I just feel bad, you know. She's probably so flustered." A woman in pearls leaned forward slightly, peering at Olivia with a look that wasn't quite sympathy, wasn't quite amusement. "Poor thing," she murmured. Not anger, not outrage, just a vague, detached pity, as if Olivia were something unfortunate to be observed rather than a person who had just been humiliated. Amanda clapped her hands lightly, regaining attention. "All right, let's get this sorted. Lucy, why don't you see if there's an extra blanket? She can sit on it for the rest of the flight." There was a blanket, like she was something that needed to be covered up. Lucy hesitated, looking between Amanda and Olivia. The urge to object was clear in her eyes, but once again she faltered. "Of course," she mumbled before walking toward the storage compartment. Amanda, ever the professional, let out a dramatic sigh. "Honestly, I just wish I could help more. But, you know, rules are rules. Unless," she let her words trail off, then tilted her head slightly. "Would you like to call someone?" Olivia looked up for the first time in minutes. "Call someone." Amanda nodded, her expression all innocence. "A relative? A caretaker? Maybe someone who can sort this out for you." There was a beat of silence, a heavy, suffocating pause, and then a quiet, hushed whisper from a few rows up. "Oh God," a man muttered under his breath. "She thinks she's alone." Amanda smiled, as if she had just done Olivia a kindness. Olivia looked back down at her lap, staring at the fine lines of her aging hands, the hands that had built a life, raised children, held the weight of years with grace. For Olivia, the weight of every second was unbearable. The stain on the seat beside her had dried into a dark patch, a lingering reminder of Amanda's carefully orchestrated humiliation. A thin airline blanket was now spread over it, offered not with kindness, but as a symbolic cover-up, an unspoken message that she should be grateful for whatever scraps of dignity remained. She had barely moved in the past hour, trapped not just by the physical confinement of her seat, but by the silent judgment surrounding her. The murmurs had faded, but the occasional glance, the subtle smirk, the quiet shake of a head from another passenger, all of it felt suffocating. But then something unavoidable happened. Her body reminded her of its needs. She had been ignoring it, willing herself to endure just a little longer, but the discomfort had grown unbearable. The nearest lavatory was only a few steps away, but the idea of standing up, of drawing attention to herself again, sent a wave of nausea through her. Still, she had no choice. Slowly, she unbuckled her seatbelt, gripping the armrest as she pushed herself up. The moment she moved, she felt the shift in energy around her, subtle but immediate. Conversations paused. A few heads lifted. As she stepped into the aisle, Amanda, who had been standing near the galley, turned with perfect timing, her expression lighting up with false surprise. "Oh, going somewhere, ma'am?" Olivia kept her voice even. "The restroom." Amanda's lips parted slightly, as if just realizing something. "Oh, of course. Do you need help?" The way she said it, slow, deliberate, made it clear she wasn't offering assistance. She was making a spectacle. "No," Olivia said firmly, but her voice, quiet as it was, felt lost in the space between them. Amanda made a small, amused sound in her throat. "Well, just be careful. Airplane restrooms can be tricky." She stepped in front of Olivia, blocking the narrow passageway with an exaggerated show of concern. "Are you sure you know how to use it?" A few chuckles floated from the first-class cabin. Amanda turned slightly, as if seeking validation. These doors can be confusing sometimes. You don't want to get stuck, do you? The remark wasn't just meant to be condescending, it was meant to infantilize. To reduce Olivia to someone incapable, someone to be pitied. She had endured so much already. But this was something else. Olivia didn't react. She didn't argue. She simply waited, her gaze steady. Amanda, disappointed by the lack of visible humiliation, gave a small shrug and finally stepped aside. "All right, go ahead," she said, but as Olivia brushed past her, she added in a hushed but cutting tone, "Don't take too long. We wouldn't want to hold up service." The door closed behind her, sealing her in the tiny space. Olivia exhaled shakily, her fingers gripping the edge of the small sink. She stared at her reflection in the dim, unflattering light. This wasn't just about a seat anymore. It wasn't just about spilled wine or whispers or the quiet exclusion woven into every action. It was about being erased, being reduced to nothing. She stayed inside longer than she needed to, steadying her breathing, preparing herself to step back out into the world Amanda had created for her. But when she finally did, Amanda was already waiting. "Oh, there you are. We got a little worried," she said brightly, loud enough for the passengers nearby to hear. "Everything go okay in there?" It was a trap. If Olivia responded, she would be feeding into the spectacle Amanda was trying to create. If she ignored her, Amanda would only press harder. So she just walked past her. Amanda's smile flickered for a fraction of a second before she covered it with a laugh. Well, that was quick. Guess she figured it out after all. A few heads turned, some passengers smirking behind their complimentary champagne glasses. Greg, who had been standing near the galley, frowned. "Amanda, that's enough." Amanda looked at him innocently. "What?" "I was just checking in. It's part of our job to make sure all passengers are comfortable." "Comfortable?" Greg echoed, his tone flat. Amanda shrugged, then turned her attention elsewhere. She was already moving on to the next part of her game. Minutes later, when Olivia returned to her seat, she found Amanda standing beside it, her hands sifting through Olivia's handbag, its contents scattered across the armrest and onto the floor. Olivia froze. Amanda glanced up, feigning surprise. "Oh, I was just doing a quick security check. Nothing to worry about." There was nothing in Olivia's bag that warranted a search. Nothing that could have possibly raised suspicion. Amanda hadn't done this for security. She had done it for the spectacle. Passengers nearby whispered amongst themselves. A man in first class shook his head disapprovingly. "They should have checked her bags before she even got on," he muttered. Olivia bent down slowly, methodically picking up each item. Her wallet, her reading glasses, a neatly folded piece of paper. Amanda smiled, watching her. "You can never be too careful," she said, then, almost as an afterthought, added, "It's for everyone's safety, after all." The message was clear. Olivia, despite her silence, despite her stillness, was being treated as a threat. As Olivia adjusted her handbag, carefully ensuring that everything was in place after Amanda's earlier spectacle, she heard the flight attendant's voice drift from the front of the cabin. Her tone deliberately hushed, yet just loud enough for certain passengers to overhear. "I just don't know if she's doing okay," Amanda murmured to Greg, sighing heavily. "She's been acting off." Greg looked up from his checklist, frowning. "Off how?" Amanda bit her lip, feigning concern. "She barely spoke to me earlier, and when she did, she seemed confused. And then there's the issue with the restroom. It took her a while to come out. I mean, she could have been disoriented in there." Greg hesitated. "Amanda, I really don't think, I just think we should be careful," Amanda pressed, folding her arms. "If she's unwell, we're responsible for making sure she's safe. I don't want to assume anything, but at her age, cognitive issues can happen unexpectedly." The words were a calculated strike. Amanda wasn't just calling Olivia a nuisance anymore. She was labeling her as incapable, as a liability. Greg sighed, rubbing his temple. "Are you saying you think she's unfit to fly?" Amanda tilted her head. "I'm saying we should at least check." Greg exhaled through his nose, clearly uneasy. But before he could argue, Amanda had already turned toward the intercom. A few passengers in first class exchanged glances as her voice echoed through the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, if there is a medical professional on board, we kindly ask for your assistance in assessing a passenger's well-being. Please notify a crew member if you are available. The words had barely left her mouth before Olivia felt every eye in the cabin shift toward her. A heavy silence stretched through the space. Olivia's stomach tightened. She had been in this position before, not exactly like this, but close enough. The feeling of being put on display, of having her competence questioned in a way no one else's would be. A few rows ahead, an older man in a gray blazer raised a hand. "I'm a retired physician," he said. "Who needs assistance?" Amanda placed a hand on her chest, wearing the expression of a woman who is simply burdened with too much concern. "Oh, thank you so much, sir. It's the passenger seated near the back, miss," she trailed off deliberately, as if she had already forgotten Olivia's name. The doctor turned, his gaze landing on Olivia. His brow furrowed slightly, but he stood anyway, making his way toward her seat. Olivia didn't move. She didn't speak. She just waited. The doctor crouched slightly, keeping his voice low. "Ma'am, are you feeling all right?" "I'm fine," Olivia replied, her voice steady but weary. Amanda stepped in before the doctor could respond. "She's been quiet most of the flight," she said, "but earlier she seemed confused about her seat, and then she had trouble with the restroom. I just want to make sure she's not experiencing any dizziness or memory issues." The doctor glanced at Amanda, then back at Olivia. "Do you have any medical conditions we should be aware of?" "No," Olivia said. "Are you feeling dizzy?" "No." Amanda let out a small, sympathetic sigh. "Are you sure? If you're feeling overwhelmed, we can move you somewhere more comfortable." Olivia turned her head slightly. "I said I'm fine." The doctor studied her for a moment longer before standing. "She seems completely coherent to me." Amanda let out a small, uncertain laugh. "Oh, well, I just wanted to be sure. You never know." The doctor gave her a long, unimpressed look before nodding at Olivia and returning to his seat. Amanda, unshaken, merely smiled and turned back to Greg. "We tried," she whispered. Greg, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, exhaled heavily. "Amanda, this is ridiculous." She shrugged. "I was being responsible." Greg didn't reply. Amanda let the moment linger before finally moving away, but she wasn't finished. She still had one more play left. 15 minutes later, as the flight continued, she approached Olivia's seat once more, this time with a forced look of concern. "Ma'am," she said softly, crouching beside her, "I've spoken to the captain, and we just want to make sure you're comfortable." Olivia didn't respond. Amanda sighed. "We're thinking it might be best for you to move to an area where the crew can check on you more easily. We don't want you feeling unwell back here by yourself." She paused, waiting, before adding the final blow. "We've arranged for a seat in the crew section, where it's quieter. It's close to us, and that way, if you need anything, we can be right there." It was phrased like an act of kindness, but the message was clear. She was being removed. From this seat. From this space. From this flight. Greg's voice cut in sharply. "Amanda, enough." Amanda straightened, blinking at him innocently. "Excuse me." "This has gone too far," Greg said, his voice low but firm. "You've harassed this woman enough." Amanda scoffed. "I was just following protocol." "You weren't," Greg snapped. Amanda's smile twitched. A few passengers had started watching again. Greg turned to Olivia. "Ma'am, you don't have to move anywhere. You're fine right where you are." Olivia, still seated in the back near the lavatories, felt the exhaustion settle deep into her bones. Every part of her ached, not just from a cramped space, but from the weight of everything she had endured. She had held herself together for so long, weathering every humiliation, every quiet act of erasure. But she was tired. She wanted the flight to be over. She wanted to disappear. And then something changed. It started with a ripple of movement near the front of the plane. A man in a sharply tailored charcoal gray suit stepped into the first-class cabin, his presence commanding attention without him needing to say a word. He wasn't just another passenger. The authority in his posture, the sharpness in his gaze, made it clear. This was someone who mattered. Amanda, still nursing her wounded pride after Greg's public defiance, straightened instantly at the sight of him. "Mr. Reynolds," she greeted, her voice sliding into the well-practiced charm she reserved for VIP passengers. "What a surprise. I didn't know you were on board today." Mr. Reynolds didn't return her smile. Instead, his eyes swept past her, scanning the cabin with a cool, assessing gaze. Then, without a word, he stepped past Amanda and began walking toward the back of the plane, toward Olivia. The shift in atmosphere was immediate. Passengers turned in their seats, watching with quiet curiosity as the sharply dressed man moved past them with purpose. Even Greg and Lucy, who had been lingering near the galley, exchanged uncertain glances. Olivia, sensing the attention now centered on her, lifted her head just as Mr. Reynolds stopped beside her row. For a long moment, he simply looked at her. Then, his expression softened, just barely. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice measured and respectful. "I'm so sorry for the inconvenience." The words didn't register at first. Olivia blinked up at him, her mind struggling to process the sudden shift. Amanda, standing a few feet away, let out a confused laugh. "Oh, you two know each other?" she asked, still trying to regain control of the situation. Mr. Reynolds finally turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Amanda, do you have any idea who this woman is?" The question, spoken so calmly, sent a hush through the surrounding passengers. Amanda blinked. "Mrs. Carter," he continued, not waiting for Amanda's reply, "is one of the largest private investors in this airline. She's a direct shareholder in the parent company." Which means, he let the sentence hang for a moment, letting the weight of it sink in. She technically owns part of this plane. The silence that followed was suffocating. Amanda went completely still, her face draining of color. Someone in first class let out an audible breath. Another passenger shifted uncomfortably in their seat, clearly re-evaluating everything they had just witnessed. Lucy's eyes widened in shock. Greg, meanwhile, closed his eyes for half a second, exhaling quietly as if to say, "Finally." Olivia, still seated, felt her hands tighten around the strap of her handbag. She wasn't sure what she had expected, but it wasn't this. Mr. Reynolds turned fully to Amanda now. His voice remained eerily even. "Would you care to explain, Amanda, why a woman who holds significant financial interest in this airline is sitting in the back of the plane, near the lavatories, after being forcibly removed from her purchased first-class seat?" Amanda's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "Or," he continued, "why I received an urgent email mid-flight detailing multiple passenger complaints about discriminatory behavior from a flight attendant named Amanda Collins." Amanda flinched. The whispers had started up again, but this time they weren't mocking Olivia. They were dissecting Amanda. A man in a business suit who had laughed earlier at Olivia's expense now shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. The woman in pearls, who had muttered "poor thing," suddenly looked mortified. Amanda, grasping for anything to salvage the situation, let out a nervous laugh. "Mr. Reynolds, I think there's been some misunderstanding." "No," he cut her off, his voice like a blade. "I don't think there has." Amanda swallowed. I was just trying to follow protocol." Mr. Reynolds let out a slow breath, then glanced at Greg. Did she follow protocol? Greg's hesitation lasted less than a second. "No, sir," he said firmly. "She didn't." Amanda's breath hitched. Mr. Reynolds turned back to Olivia, his expression softening just slightly. "Mrs. Carter, would you like your original seat back?" For the first time since boarding, Olivia hesitated. Not because she didn't want it, but because the damage had already been done. Still, after a long moment, she nodded. "Greg," Mr. Reynolds said, not looking away from Olivia, "please escort Mrs. Carter to her proper seat." Greg nodded immediately. "Of course." Amanda, still frozen, suddenly found her voice. "Wait, Mr. Reynolds turned to her, his expression now unreadable. "I suggest you remain silent, Amanda." Amanda's breath came shallow and uneven as she stood frozen in the aisle, watching Olivia being escorted back to first class with quiet dignity. The walls of her reality were crumbling around her, the sense of control she had wielded so effortlessly now slipping through her fingers like sand. This wasn't supposed to happen. She had been in charge. She had dictated the rules. And yet, here she was, powerless, surrounded by the weight of 1,000 eyes, some shocked, some gleeful, but all fixated on her. Mr. Reynolds, standing with perfect composure, pulled out his phone, fingers moving across the screen with quiet efficiency. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, until finally, he lifted his gaze, locking eyes with Amanda. "You'll be removed from this flight as soon as we land." The words landed like a gunshot. Amanda's stomach twisted violently, her breath catching in her throat. "Wait," she stammered, forcing a nervous laugh. "Mr. Reynolds, this is all a misunderstanding." His expression remained unmoved. "A misunderstanding?" His voice was calm, but there was a sharpness beneath it that cut through Amanda's feeble attempts at deflection. "Because I just got off a call with the CEO, and he certainly didn't see this as a misunderstanding." Amanda's knees almost buckled. Mr. Reynolds continued, his tone controlled but unwavering. "You do know who Olivia Carter really is, don't you?" Amanda's mouth opened, but no words came out. Reynolds didn't wait for her to respond. He took a measured step closer, his voice lowering just enough to be menacing. "She's family, Amanda." A sharp gasp echoed from one of the passengers. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Amanda felt the blood drain from her face. Her legs trembled. She swallowed, grasping at anything to anchor herself, but nothing came. Her mind raced, trying to salvage what little was left of her position, her authority, her career. "I didn't know," she whispered hoarsely. Reynolds tilted his head slightly. "And if you had known?" Amanda hesitated. Reynolds let the silence stretch before nodding. "Exactly." The realization set in like a lead weight in her chest. It wasn't just that she had mistreated a first-class passenger. It wasn't even that she had humiliated a shareholder. She had spent the entire flight demeaning the matriarch of the Carter family, the very people who owned the airline. And now she was about to pay the price. Passengers sat in stunned silence, no longer whispering, no longer smirking. The same people who had laughed at Olivia's expense now sat stiff, watching as Amanda unraveled before them. Mr. Reynolds turned toward Greg and Lucy. "I want a full written report from both of you, effective immediately." Lucy nodded quickly, her hands still clenched at her sides. Greg, looking grim, murmured, "Yes, sir." Amanda turned to Greg in desperation, her voice a frantic whisper. "Greg, please. You know I was just following procedure." Greg looked at her for a long moment. Then, with quiet finality, he shook his head. "No," he said simply. "You weren't." Amanda's breath hitched. Reynolds pulled out his phone again and dialed swiftly. "Yes, get me Captain Stewart," he said, stepping aside. Amanda stood there, feeling exposed, small, as Reynolds spoke in a low, clipped voice. "Yes, I want her removed immediately upon landing. No, she is not to board another flight under this airline. Yes, fired." Reynolds hung up, slipping his phone back into his pocket. When he turned back to Amanda, his next words were cold, unforgiving. "You will collect your belongings when we land. You will not speak to another passenger. You will not make a scene." And most importantly, he stepped even closer, his voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear. "You will never work for this airline again." Amanda couldn't breathe. "Do I make myself clear?" Amanda's lips trembled. "Yes," she choked out. Reynolds stepped back, his posture regaining its effortless authority. "Good." Then, with a nod toward Greg and Lucy, he added, "Escort her to the back." Greg hesitated, but eventually reached for Amanda's arm, guiding her away from first class. Amanda stumbled slightly, feeling as if she were being paraded through the cabin, past every face that had once smiled at her, past every passenger who had once obeyed her orders. But now, those same faces looked at her with quiet satisfaction. She had spent the entire flight making Olivia Carter feel small. And now, Amanda was the one drowning in her own insignificance. The rest of the flight passed in uneasy silence. No one spoke to Amanda. No one defended her. She sat at the very back of the plane, stripped of her authority, her uniform suddenly feeling suffocating. The same passengers who had once laughed at her subtle jabs now avoided eye contact, as if proximity to her downfall might somehow taint them. Even Lucy, who had once hesitated to oppose her, now kept a firm distance, as if finally seeing Amanda for what she was. By the time the plane touched down, the weight of reality had settled deep in Amanda's chest. She was finished. The moment the aircraft doors opened, two uniformed airline security officers stepped aboard, their expressions neutral but firm. One of them approached Mr. Reynolds, nodding in understanding before turning to Amanda. "Miss Collins," he said flatly, "please come with us." Amanda's stomach twisted. This isn't necessary," she tried, her voice cracking. "I can leave on my own." Reynolds, now standing near the exit, crossed his arms. "This is necessary," he said simply. "You're being escorted off this plane because you no longer represent this airline." Amanda's hands trembled as she gathered her belongings. Every movement felt like a slow, deliberate march toward the inevitable. She cast one last desperate glance toward Greg, hoping for a sliver of sympathy. But all she found was quiet disappointment. As she stepped into the jet bridge, she could hear the murmurs already beginning. Is that the flight attendant who got fired? She really thought she could get away with that? Serves her right. The words cut deep, but the true horror was waiting beyond the terminal. She barely made it 5 steps into the airport before seeing the flashing lights of cameras. Reporters, travelers holding up their phones, already live streaming. She didn't need to check the news to know what had happened. Someone had leaked the story before the plane even landed. Her disgrace wasn't just confined to this flight. It had gone viral. Her face, once the composed, polished image of authority, was now plastered across headlines. Flight attendant humiliates elderly black woman, gets fired mid-flight. Airline scandal. Employee harasses shareholder, faces immediate consequences. Every detail of what she had done, every smirk, every cruel remark, was now replaying for millions to see. She was done, not just with this airline, not just with this job. The airline industry was small. No carrier would risk hiring someone with her level of public disgrace. Even if she tried to disappear, the internet never forgot. She would forever be that flight attendant, the one who thought she was untouchable, until she wasn't. Back on the plane, as passengers began gathering their belongings, Olivia Carter stood, smoothing the front of her elegant dress. Every movement was composed, unrushed. She had endured the longest, most degrading flight of her life, but she would not let it define her. As she reached the exit, Mr. Reynolds stepped aside respectfully. But Olivia didn't leave immediately. She turned, looking through the jet bridge's open door, where Amanda stood just beyond the flashing cameras, frozen in horror as her downfall unfolded in real time. And then Olivia spoke. "You thought you had the right to judge me." Her voice was quiet, but it carried through the jet bridge with perfect clarity. Amanda flinched, as if the words themselves struck her. Olivia took a step closer, the power dynamics between them fully reversed. "But you didn't." She tilted her head slightly, watching as Amanda's breath shuddered. "You never did." Amanda swallowed hard, her mouth opening as if to say something, but nothing came. Olivia gave a small, knowing smile, one that carried no malice, only finality. "You just learned the most expensive lesson of your life," she said. "I hope for your sake you don't waste it." Then, without another glance, Olivia turned and walked away, stepping into the terminal with grace, leaving Amanda alone in the wreckage of her own making. The end. If you enjoyed this story and love seeing justice served, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. What was the most satisfying moment for you? Amanda's downfall or Olivia's final words? Let us know in the comments. And tell us, where are you watching from today?